What's up everybody, welcome to Balkan Moto. Last time we made the electronics pan. Today's episode we're going to continue working on some of the bracketry we're going to need and making the seat pan. Let's check it out. So since last time we made the electronics pan, what I've done is I've put this rubber trim on the edge of it, just so that I don't end up scratching anything as I'm placing it on the bike, as well as cutting myself on the edges. Even though I rounded them off, it's still possible. For the time being, we're just going to keep it like that. The final product will actually have this exact piece of trim on it. It just is going to be painted black, and pretty sure it fits still. So yeah, there we go. Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to focus on making the seat pan, which will be a sheet of metal that will kind of go like that over here, and all the bracketry we're going to need for it, as well as the bracketry or the mounting points and the bracketry for the springs that are going to sit here and here. In terms of those parts, I actually have them. So we have here some barrel 3-inch springs, which we're going to end up utilizing. Stay. There's a second one. So these are the 2 springs, which will end up being more or less right around here, like this. And then the other piece that we're going to use to measure out and cut the seat pan is the gel insert that I bought. So from Saddlemen, there's this gel insert, so it's nice and soft. So this is roughly how wide the seat would be, as you can see. So it'll be kind of like maybe about here, just so the springs can actually mount to these locations here. Like the seat will obviously be elevated, like right around this height, but we're going to use this to cut the shape that we need, and then we're going to start measuring out how to mount it and all of that goodness. The brackets at the front, we're going to design them so that the seat can be slid back and forth and adjusted, so that we don't have to worry about this coming up and hitting the seat when it's mounted. So without further ado, let's actually begin by designing the bracket that will go on here and the other bracket that will then mount to the seat pan itself. For the other brackets, we have this, I believe this is 1/4 inch piece of steel that we're going to use to make the brackets. As well as I bought an axle bolt with the axle piece for it, so this can swivel, and then some nuts and washers. The plan is that essentially we're going to make, well, let's just draw it out. So on the bike we have the tank kind of like so, and there's like those 2 bolts that are there. So there's kind of 2 little grooves in that bracket that kind of define the max width. So what we're going to do is we're going to design a bracket, the bottom piece of the bracket, that will fit within those 2 grooves and have obviously the 2 holes so it mounts on there. And then from a side view, so we'll have that little piece like that with the holes and 2 bolts in it. We're going to also do a sidewall on this side and on the other side, and then on the back side as well, and we're going to drill a hole here. So this bolt will actually end up being going through this hole and kind of sitting like this from a top view, and then the seat will have a different bracket which will have essentially the axle, so this cylinder from a side view like this, with a piece of this metal on top of it like that, welded on, and then we're going to put 2 extra pieces on either side also for support, like that. So this will be welded in. So when this goes into that, in between the 2 spaces there, so kind of here, it will be able to swivel back and forth like this, and then the seat will actually be mounted on top of this, kind of like so, and then the springs would be on the back side like that. So that's kind of what we're looking to design. So today we're going to work on these 2 brackets and try to design what they will look like. So let's begin with the first one. I think for that one we're going to need to do 2 things. This piece of metal is actually too wide for the space between the 2 grooves. So if we look at that, it's actually too wide. So we're going to measure that space, and we're going to cut a piece that's actually that width that we're going to weld on the bottom part of it. So coming back to our drawing, we're going to have another piece that's kind of under here, kind of the same length but narrower, so that it fits in there, and this bigger piece fits on top, welded, and then the walls, the cut pieces. So let me take some measurements, and I'll probably cut out some cardboard pieces to mock it up, and I'll show you how things are going to work. So for the first bracket that's going to mount down here at the tank, these are the pieces we're going to need. So we're going to need a piece that will fit between the 2 grooves like that, another piece that will mount on top of it to kind of stabilize things, 2 wall pieces that will mount like this, and we'll weld them, and a back piece that will be welded on this side for structural rigidity. Just to kind of illustrate, let me go put it on the bike, and so you guys can get a better visual. Alright, so this is kind of what the bracket will look like. The main piece that's also missing now is obviously all of this will be welded. There will be holes on these walls, kind of right in the middle, where this piece and the axle bolt will go through, so that the entire thing kind of fits here, so that the other bracket can go kind of like here and swivel up and down on that hinge that essentially is created here. So let's cut out the pieces of metal that we need for these and kind of test fit them to see if I measured things right. I suspect I may need longer bolts, just because these ones just barely bite with cardboard, but let's see how they do with the 16 gauge steel, or the thicker steel actually, so the 1/4 inch, and we'll see how it goes. so we made the pieces for the first bracket. Some of them are still hot, but essentially this we'll need to drill 2 holes into. Same with this one, so that they match up on top of each other like that. These ones will need a center hole that can fit the axle bolt and will be welded onto the sides like so. And the last one will just be the kind of structural integrity piece that's welded at the back. The first part of the base bracket is done. So we have this piece here that kind of lines up with the holes. And then we have the other piece that fits on top of it, which goes like this to kind of create that nice space, and things line up and can be tightened. Fortunately enough, the steel I'm using is actually not too thick, so these bolts don't need to be changed. Alright, so we got all the pieces. We have the bottom piece, the one that goes on top of it, the back piece that will get welded there, and the 2 side pieces that will get welded on the side like this and like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the bolts from the bike to hold these together so I can tack them, and then use my vise over here to kind of support this so I can tack that. And once everything's tacked together, I will go ahead and weld it all together. I don't expect to do like a super nice job, but we'll try to do as best as we can. Alright, the bracket is ready. So I had to do some grinding. I made some mistakes. I welded things wrong. Didn't weld them too good, but whatever. At the end of the day, it's a pretty solid bracket. 1/4 inch steel should support quite a bit. So the 2 screws at the bottom mount with the tank nuts or screws, bolts, whatever they're called, and you can see that this hole is bigger on one side and smaller on the other. That's because the axle bolt slides in and anchors against the other side. Just because this bolt is a little longer, and I made a mistake of actually welding these things on top of the bottom plate instead of on the sides, so that produced this extra lack of space here, but that's fine because we're going to tighten it on this side with a washer, a locking nut washer, and a nut. And we'll have I also trimmed the actual axle cover, or whatever this thing is called, cylinder. So it actually fits in between here and can spin freely. This will be welding to the other bracket that will mount to the seat. So stay tuned for that. But let's just see how this fits on the bike. Tank here, and bracket goes on like so. We have the tank bolts. And the tricky bit with these is that the rear one needs to go on first and bite, otherwise the front one will lift it and it won't work. Maybe I can widen the holes a little bit or something of that sort, just to get things to fit a little better, but for now, there we go. Alright, nice and snug. And then we have the axle bolt with the actual put that in there. Line it up. My drilling is not perfect, so this is a little bit on an angle, but I'll give it enough slack so that that thing can spin freely. And we'll see how the other bracket that I need to weld, that's going to essentially pivot up and down like that. But either way, that's the bracket. Now we'll need to make a piece, another bracket that essentially was welded to it and can pivot up and down like that, which will mount to the seat pan, and then the seat pan will mount to the 2 springs back here. So I wasn't too happy with the result of the first box I made, just because I made so many mistakes with it, and I was just essentially grinding it down so that I can make it fit now. I ended up making another one. And you know, second time around, much cleaner, much straighter, you know, more like a professional box. Also, you can kind of see how much wider it is just because these two pieces are actually on the sides of the bottom piece and not on top of it. Like quite literally this one fits inside it. And the other thing that I had messed up with this one is, well, when I flipped the sides of these two pieces, but also the holes didn't line up perfectly. So when you did put in the bolt, it was slightly at an angle. And because the entire thing was essentially narrower, there was this gap left out here. Now with the new one, it goes in on the left side, or as it should, and it actually goes in properly. And it's nice and straight. Now the only thing is I ended up cutting this piece, so I need to go get another one so that I can actually make it work properly. Because right now, it's, well, you can see, it's a little short, which it's not that I can't work with it. Yes, I can certainly weld a piece on top and weld the other pieces against it and make it work, but I'd rather have a little more surface area here to support the seat. The other thing that I did differently this time is on the old piece, I made the mistake of welding that spacer at the bottom and then having to grind it to make it fit. In this box, I actually left it as a separate spacer, and I think I'm gonna keep it that way, just because it's easier to deal with. I mean, I could try to weld it, but the problem with that is I can't weld it on the sides. I have to weld it only on here and on here, which may not be the best. I mean, it might work. It might certainly keep it on there. But I think it might just be easier to just keep it like that, paint it, and have it as a separate piece. Let's take a look at the way this new box, actually, this new bracket fits on the bike now. Alright, with the electronics pan kind of in place, we have the spacer bracket on there. We have the new bracket on top of that. The two stock bolts now actually fit nice and properly, just because I also drilled the holes with the proper drill bit instead of dicking around with a smaller drill bit and then trying to widen them. Now they actually fit. So there we go. The bracket's nice and solid. And then we have the axle bolt with the axle parts. We have a nice big washer. I'll see, I might just use a normal size washer because this one is a little bit of overkill. We have a locking washer and a locking nut. Not gonna tighten that, but that's the idea. So we have this thing spinning. So then the next part, it would be, the next bracket would be essentially making a piece that fits in here. So slightly less than this, just so it can move freely. That will be welded to that cylinder that can move up and down like that with the cylinder as it rotates. And then that will then have the seat pan sitting on top of it, and then the springs mounted back here. So pretty straightforward. I'm quite happy with the way this turned out when it's done properly. Yeah, so that's more or less it. Next will be, I need to go buy some more of this 1/4 inch thick, what is this, 1 inch? 1 inch wide steel to make the rest of the brackets, because I will need essentially this one that mounts to the cylinder, like I said here. And then there's going to be another one that will kind of be part of the seat itself, which will kind of come across like this and mount on top of the 2 springs. and I might just reinforce the seat pan with yet another kind of as part of it in the middle, just so that this 16 gauge steel doesn't bend under my weight, but rather has the 1/4 inch steel in there to support it. So yeah, next I just need to get another bolt, another one of these cylinders, cut it to the right width, more metal like this, and make the other bracket. So before we continue with the rest of the brackets, let's actually kind of wrap up the electronics pan. So we're going to measure out 4 holes that need to be drilled on here, and in those holes we're going to fit these bolts. These are the ones that are actually going to keep the whole thing to the frame, which are going to be kind of in around this area, like so. And then we have these ones, which are, I found these very interesting rubber stopper caps. I don't know what to call them. So it's just a normal bolt that's going to be around here, and we have this little rubber cap. Now the interesting thing about it is it creates this nice wide soft top to the bolt, so that when it is screwed in, we have literally the perfect setup to put the springs on it. So this will actually go right into it, and all I need is a big leather washer essentially that I'll put on these to be able to mount the springs. So once we have the 4 holes here, we're also going to drill the 4 holes to match on the frame, and then draw out the frame bits and how to cut the backs of this pieces so that they match up a little bit nicer. And at that point this piece would be done. And after drilling the frame as well and screwing things in and snugging it in place, this is kind of what the end result will be. So we have these like nice rubber screw supported tips that will take the springs on them. We're actually going to mount the springs to the seat itself, so they just kind of come down and rest on here. I am going to put some leather washers on here so that the spring sits nice and soft and doesn't squeak or do any funny business. I still need to trim these pieces so till like about here, just to kind of make them nice and clean. And yeah, so that's kind of how it's looking. Next we'll be finishing up the secondary bracket up there, and then cutting out the seat for the seat pan. Take the time to grind the back parts of the electronics pan and a little bit of a trim on the insides, so make this a little bit wider and kind of more in line with the frame itself. So this piece is more or less done. It just needs paint, and I'll see whether or not I'm going to do the trim on the outside. Just based on how it was looking when I was fully mounting it yesterday, I didn't like it too much, so I might just keep it without it and let it sit like that. When it's black, it's going to be nice and seamless in there. So let's mount this on the bike and then take some measurements. The next bracket we're going to make is the main bracket that's going to be attached to the seat that will mount the springs to it. So it kind of has to have at least this length here. So let's do that. Expand and its final shape on the bike. So we have plenty of clearance here, almost a finger, and again almost a finger on that side, maybe a little bit closer on that side, but that's just how the whole frame is. Either way, there's definitely plenty of clearance for the fender to go up. So let's measure this distance between these two and make a piece. Actually, we're probably going to need a piece that's as wide as the seat pan, just so we have something to bolt it onto. So that's 12 inches. So yeah, let's cut a piece of 12 inches from the 1/8 of an inch bar and drill some holes in it. All right, so I have the bracket that will mount to, that will be part of the seat, and we'll have the springs mounted to it. So in order to mount them, what we're going to do is we're going to take this setup. So the top side of them will have the screws, which for the actual seat pan, I'm going to actually weld these on top and weld this to the seat pan itself. So these are not going to move at all. So we'll have these on one side. Then on the other side, we'll end up having a leather washer here, and then the nut will go through with a metal washer. Maybe I'll get a leather washer underneath it as well, and a locking washer as well. So we'll have something like this with the spring kind of, well, this will be inside the spring, locking it to this. So let me mount those temporarily and start taking some measurements. Okay, the spring's mounted to the bar, and this will end up going right on top of these rubber bits with some leather washers. So that's essentially how high the seat will be. So now I'll put the box back in, and we'll start working on the pivot part of the brackets. And after that, all that's left is to cut out the actual seat pan and figure out the shape of that. All right, so with the front bracket on and the axle bolt, I actually wasn't able to find another one of these cylinders that fits on this specific axle bolt, and I didn't feel like remaking the box for a third time. So we're actually going to end up reusing that. So we want a piece like this piece that just is going to be welded to it and kind of extends out this way. So for adjustability and versatility, I guess, it needs to be able to hook to the seat itself at 2 points. So probably a good 7 inches would be enough. And then we'll end up putting 2 grooves quite wide to be able to adjust the seat a little bit back and forth on it, so that we can mount it just right and have the pressure on the springs in the right way. So let's measure out 7 inches, cut it off, and then see how we're going to attach it to this. Here's our 7-inch piece and the axle bolt spacer, whatever you want to call that. So this piece we're going to weld right on top like that, as perpendicular as we can, on both this side and on the underside as well, and have it centered. And then to add a little bit more structural rigidity, we're probably going to cut some more pieces of this 8-inch steel to kind of add as supports this way. That should create a little bit more structural rigidity so this thing doesn't just bend. Then we're going to drill 2 holes on it that are going to be kind of oval, so kind of like this. That will allow us to mount the 2 mounting screws and have it adjustable. The main bracket with the axle spacer is on, and not a bad job. I mean, for non-professional, it did the job. So next we're going to weld these guys. So I cut these half pieces that we're going to mount essentially just inside it, up against the cylinder at the end. And the point being that this is supposed to add more structural rigidity to this thing so it doesn't bend like this way. Not that it will, I mean, it's pretty thick metal, but I think I'd feel safer if I added some extra stuff on there, just to make it nice and thick. In terms of how this ends up going on the bike, that's once the box is in place, this will be about here. So kind of moving up and down, or rather down only. So yep, let's weld those other pieces, and then we're going to drill holes on it and wrap it up. Alright, after some welding and grinding, we have the center bracket. In terms of what it looks like, I'll show you. That's what it ended up looking like on the inside. I'll still need to drill the holes for mounting, but and probably trim these last end pieces here. But yeah, I'm getting better at welding, and certainly grinding my mistakes away also helps. I might need to trim this, grind it a little bit more on this side and on this side, just because right now it goes in, but it's, you know, grinding to like move up and down. So maybe getting it to have a little bit more space would be better, but that's pretty good. Yeah, so I think we're gonna call it quits for now, and pick up tomorrow with drilling the holes and finishing this piece off, and then that'll be it. All right, so the next step for this bracket is doing some grinding and drilling some holes. So on the top side, we're gonna drill 4 holes with the drill. That is gonna go boom, 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 boom. And then we're gonna use the grinder to then cut out the pieces in between to make these big ovals where the screws, the 2 screws that are gonna attach it to the seat pan, can then fit and then be adjustable back and forth. Then we're going to grind these off, these bits, and round them off nicely like that and like this. So there's going to be a rounded back. And finally, as you can see the colored in area here, I need to grind down a little bit more just so that it doesn't touch the other box's walls so much, but rather there's a bit of free movement in there. And then this bracket is done. All right, and here's the finished product. We have the 2 elongated holes so that the screws can fit in and be adjusted. I grinded down the sides a little more here and here, so now it actually fits very easily in there. As you can see, like about a 2 millimeter gap for it to like rotate, so that's nice. And I also trimmed the back side to like round off the excess metal there, so now it actually looks a little more finished. So this piece is now also ready for paint. Alright guys, that was it for this episode. We have the pivot bracket as well as the bracket for the back of the springs. We're finally ready with the hardware part, and we can start with making the actual seat pan. So make sure to subscribe, hit the little bell for notifications when new videos become available. Check me out on Instagram at BalkanMoto2018, and make sure to check out balkanmoto.com. Next time, we're going to be making the actual seat.